Now let's look at some pivotal figures in this draft, because we all know it's all names and who's who and who's going where. And so we're going to do a little bit of over-unders in terms of where some of these players in the range of will they'll be drafted. We've talked about him a bunch. We'll start with J.J. McCarthy. His draft position over-under is set at 5.5. The over is at plus 116. The under at minus 154. As we mentioned, RJ, you're kind of banking on a trade here. How do you view this?
Yeah, now we're getting to the good stuff, the stuff I've been tracking over at Sportsline over the last week of how these odds have moved. He has been trending under here. That has scaled back over the last day or two. His under position has come down a little bit. Circuit dropped his under to minus 125. I think under is a play if you're getting juice around minus 125, not really looking to play it at minus 150.
Okay. Emery, how do you see J.J. McCarthy, and where do you think he ultimately comes off the board?
I feel like the football side will get itself right and stop overdrafting quarterbacks. So I feel like the over is a good value here. Minnesota at 11, if they value him as the 11th best player in the class, they won't have to move, because anything higher than, in my opinion, second round is way overpriced. So I will say over. I think folks will have to understand that we'll have to let cooler heads prevail and draft first round talents in the first round. I'm hoping.
Is it a Will Levis situation, Emery?
I think obviously there's that trio of stack that need quarterbacks that right now as they sit, Vikings, Raiders, and Broncos. I think that would be his floor within 11 to 13, because I can't see. When you talk, I'm old school. When you say top five, I always reference the 1989 draft of Aikman, Barry Sanders, Deion Sanders, Derek Thomas. You don't want to be the Tony Managers in the situation, but when you look at those four, those five, man, that's a top five. I don't feel like McCarthy is of that caliber.
Yeah, and I just keep holding to the fact that you still have to have a blockbuster trade to happen. And I know that, Minnesota's armed with 2 first-rounders and a bunch of other assets, but that is still a huge hurdle to cross at a certain point. So, maybe there is some value here, Proppy. How do you view it?
I think he's overrated as a prospect. I totally get what Emery's saying, but I just seen too many tea leaves, in my opinion, that suggest that he's going to be a top 5 pick. So I agree with RJ as far as the price point is concerned. Nothing I'm looking to bet at the current number, but I do ultimately think a team who is quarterback needy will take him top 5. So I think he goes under.
Well, speaking of quarterbacks, we haven't talked about Michael Penix Jr. yet, and I'm kind of dying to talk about him because I think that he's one of the more mysterious players in this draft. I mean, we had Jonathan Jones at CBS Sports do a mock draft, and he went number 8 overall to the Atlanta Falcons. You've seen other mocks where he's going outside the first round and anywhere in between that. So his over-under is set appropriately at 32.5. The over, so him dipping into the second round, is at plus 134. The under minus 180. RJ, how do you view Michael Penix in his kind of uncertain draft status?
Yeah, in our odds tracker, he has trended massively toward the under since his release. This was minus 190 to the over less than a week ago, and now it's very heavily juiced to the under. I like playing over plus 180 at DraftKings in case the age and the medicals cause his stock to be more Will Levis than anything, but I do also like following that JJ train, sprinkling on him to go 8 or 9 as a trade-up spot for Minnesota, Denver, Vegas, in case the buzz is warranted, in case the Giants are the ones that end up with Daniels, and these teams that really need quarterbacks have to figure something out, and they start, looking at each other like, who's going to blink first? Are we going to have to move up ahead of Minnesota to get this guy? So I think there's a couple different ways you can play Penix. You can play the over on 32.5 in case, all this is smoke. And then you can also play in the top 10, which I think even just a top 10 pick might be like 29-1 last time I saw it. So if you just don't even want to put him at a one single slot and take him to get traded anywhere, 8, 9, 10, I think that's an option too.
Well, Emery, you mentioned the floor for J.J. McCarthy kind of being in that, 11, 12, 13 range. And there's a lot of quarterback needy teams there. Again, as it stands, 11 Minnesota, 12 Denver, 13 Vegas. You could say 14 New Orleans possibly, and then 16 with Seattle as well. Do you see Penix going in that range, or do you see maybe him taking a flyer at him going inside that top 10, or maybe just, trading up to 10 with New York to possibly leapfrog those teams, or do you see him falling out of this first round entirely?
It's unique because I feel like, specifically he fits the Raiders. So that's what, pick 14? So I see him at 14,
13,
but I also see
13.
13. I see him at 13, but I also see a highly likely situation where you get a team that tries to, play both sides of the fence, double dip, like the Giants. Hey, we're at 6. Let's take an elite level receiver and let's double back in the first round to get a guy that we can see help us out at QB that can get him the ball down the field. That's an option, like somebody trading back into the first round. I think Penix goes around pick 28 to 31, not to the teams that are currently sitting at 28 to 31, but I feel like that's where we'll see Michael Penix go, almost like a Lamar Jackson situation where Baltimore jumped back at pick 32 and robbed him. So I will go over here because I feel like he'll go first round, but it'll be late and somebody will trade back into the first to get him.
And Proppy, I think it's a little overrated at times when we talk about it, but everybody says, well, you got to trade back into the bottom of the first round to get that fifth-year option, especially on a quarterback. Does that make sense here? And do you jive with these guys that, it seems pretty clear that he's going to be a first-round pick?
I do think it does make some sense, although I love Penix's chances to be a first-round pick. Particularly, I think he has a great chance to go in the top 15 pick. It's been one of my favorite plays that I've been on over the last couple of weeks. It's just Penix landing in the first round, but I think he's just done so much to help his draft stock really over the last couple of months. Did wonderful at the combine, the private workout circuit as well, did very well. He's met with the teams. I just heard just glowing feedback when teams have gotten a closer look or had them in the building. So I just think with the amount of quarterback needy teams we have, particularly in that range, an 11 to 15, there are going to be teams that fall in love with Michael Penix. And I just think he's a great shot to go in the top 15. I think he's a near lock personally to be a first round pick.
So you're the one. You're the one that's been moving this market, huh, Proppy? I knew somebody was with this big swing. I was like, I think Proppy's behind this one.
And then the other quarterback that we want to quickly mention is Bo Nix. His draft position 32.5, same thing as Michael Penix, but the odds totally different. The over -210, the under 32.5 plus 154. RJ, do you see him as a first round pick?
It's basically been one-way action in the market. On the over, Circa has actually moved their line to 34.5 and is still -175 on the over. I think the under at plus 170 at DK is the value. Broncos are the clear favorite to take him still. Everybody think that's a perfect match. They don't have a second-round pick, so they're not going to do it in round 2 unless they make a trade. I think more likely is that if they can't trade up for a quarterback and they don't have the second-round pick to help them do it, I think they can trade down to the 20s and take Nix there. I think you could sprinkle a little bit on him to end up in Minnesota or Vegas at plus 600 each to cover your bases on the Denver trade up scenario. But I think pairing those with an under at plus 170 and thinking Denver finds a way to get down to the 20s and take him is the way to go.
And Emery, you were saying, you hope that first round talent stays in the first round. Do you view him as a first round talent? And then where do you see him going?
I don't. And I think the over is super juiced because of it, but I would probably stay away from this one. I think he's more of a second round talent, and that's fine. Listen, Andy Dalton, Colin Kaepernick, we've seen second round quarterbacks, get drafted and have success. And so I think that's where, we've seen way too much of Bo Nix at Auburn to try to, forget what we just watched at Oregon. It's a different situation with Michael Penix at Indiana. We saw him be a reason why Indiana was in a lot of those games. They're not a football factory, but being a football factory at Auburn and seeing why they was losing some of those games, it's hard to erase that. I think teams would kind of still, penalize Bo Nix for that. So I see him as more of a second round guy.
And then Proppy, do you kind of follow that same mindset, or because, it's a quarterback and teams always get needy for these quarterbacks that you might want to sprinkle something on that under?
It's interesting to me. I think it's he's a polarizing prospect in a lot of ways, but I agree with Emery. I personally view him as more of a second round prospect. If I'm looking at the top quarterbacks here, potentially falling out of the first round, he included with the other guys we've discussed, he'd be the most likely candidate. That being said, again, a quarterback driven league, and there's teams with, clear needs at quarterback. So wouldn't shock me. What's interesting is I think there's could be a scenario where if the Broncos potentially pass on him in the top 15, then I could see him going all the way to the early to mid second round. So I think a lot hinges on what happens early, how things shake out with a guy like Penix, where he ends up going. So ultimately I'd lean over. Wouldn't surprise me for him to go under. Nothing I have very strong conviction on, though.
Yeah, it's a good point. Again, if the board stays where it is in the second round, a lot of these teams at the top, Carolina, New England, Arizona, Washington, LA, Tennessee, Green Bay, Houston, they all kind of have their quarterback needs filled. Unless Vegas doesn't have a quarterback in the first round, maybe them at 44, 45 with New Orleans. Again, it'll be fascinating to see how, what range he goes in. Emory, do you got something to say there?
Team to keep an eye on is a team we hadn't seen in the first round in a while, and that's the Rams. Stafford can't play forever, so that would be one tricky spot where a quarterback can go.
No, it's a good point. And they are number 52 overall in the second round. And of course, number 19. Hello, Rams in the first round. Haven't seen that in a while. Picking 19th overall. The next prospect I want to talk about, you guys were talking a little bit about him before we jumped on here. Rome Odunze, his draft position. And so, RJ, right now it's over 8.5. The over is plus 124. The under 8.5, minus 166. Where do you view him?
Yeah, the mocks have consistently put him at number 9 with Chicago. The market has consistently put him under 8.5, and both of those things can't be right, obviously. Atlanta could be a good trade spot for someone to come and get him at number 8. The value to me is just playing the plus 135 on the over, not banking on a trade. Trade ups are more common to pay that premium draft capital to get it for a quarterback than a receiver, especially the third receiver in the class by a lot of evaluators, boards. So even though some have him 2, some might even have him 1. But I think it's more likely he goes 9 or 10 to the Jets, unless the Jets can make a small trade up to 8 to get him for Atlanta.
Right. This was the number that kind of stuck out to me, Emory. It just feels like, we're going to get a lot of quarterbacks in definitely the first 3 picks, possibly 4 in the first 5. That's going to just push Odunze down if we look at him as the number 3 wide receiver, as opposed to Harrison and Neighbors and then Odunze. Is that your order? And where do you see him in this 8.5 spot?
What makes it tricky is the fact that we don't know what the Cardinals are going to do. We are under the assumption that not the Cardinals, the Chargers. We under the assumption that the Cardinals will take a receiver. Cool. But Chargers need a receiver. The Giants need a receiver. Tennessee kind of, even though they need offensive line help, there's never a downside to add more talent around your young quarterback. Falcons could even double dip and get another receiver. So we could literally see the run on receivers start right after the third quarterback or fourth quarterback is taken. So this is a tough one, man. It seems easy on the surface because I agree with RJ. I feel like the Jets are ideally the spot for him. But I mean, it puts it tough in play. This is probably one pick. I would probably lean more him being a top 10 pick than to decide whether or not to go over or under 8.5.
Is that how you would kind of view this, Proppy, is to maybe just try to attack as a top 10 as opposed to this 8.5?
I'm not very as bullish as I think some other mocks or even maybe my colleagues are on Odunze. I think there's a good chance he falls out of the top 10. I'm personally not. I like the over here quite a bit. I want to preface by stating that, but I think a lot of teams don't have him maybe as their third overall wide receiver. I think Brian Thomas Jr. LSU will be that third prospect for a lot of teams. If you look at Odunze, I just think he, if we're talking about at least the top 3 wide receivers, he has by far the furthest to go to reach his ceiling. His ability to win downfield, I think, will translate right away. But as far as the short and intermediate parts of the field, I think he's a pretty raw prospect still. So I know it's been the consensus 1, 2, 3. He's been in it essentially since this draft process started. But I think there's a chance that he could go in that 10 to 15 range personally. And I do think there will be teams that won't have him as a top 3 wide receiver on their board. So I like the over here quite a bit.
And I think the Chargers are kind of a sneaky X factor here, because if they stand pat and take a wide receiver, well, then, okay, maybe that opens the door. If they trade the pick and they get a quarterback in that spot, well, then, okay, maybe that does something else. If they do what maybe RJ was saying, they take Joe Walter or an offensive tackle, maybe that changes things there a little bit for Odunze. So certainly interesting. I think I would lean over as well. It just feels like there's so many scenarios where that could get pushed down, and especially at plus 124. I think I would lean that way as well with you guys. There's another pass catching prospect here, Brock Bowers, the tight end out of Georgia. His is 11.5 over under. The over minus 122, the under minus 108. I mentioned it earlier. It feels like a lot of mocks had him going, RJ, to the Jets at number 10, even though they do have a bunch of other needs. Where do you view him?
Yeah, the market had been circling him around number 12 over the last week. Some places over 11.5 juiced, some places under 12.5 juiced. Despite those mocks, like you said, generally putting him 10th, but the odds have largely shifted in that direction over the last few days. Circa now has him minus 145 to go under 11.5 as of Monday. So that kind of more points to number 10. I think under is a solid call if you can get a good number. Will depend, I think, on whether the Jets have a crack at Odunze. I think they would take Odunze over Bowers if they had both of them in front of them. But we'll see what happens ahead of them in the draft.
In Emory, I mentioned a million trades. And again, we don't know when these trades or if these trades will go down. But I thought 11.5 was interesting because let's just say Minnesota does trade with the Chargers. They'd be sitting there at number 11 in need of some pass catching help. So wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah, and I've been saying all along that Harbaugh is a wild card. He could take him at 5. I would also keep an eye out for Tennessee. I know they have Chiga Conquo, but again, the best friend to a young quarterback is another safety valve at tight end, especially one that can take a short pass a long way. So you have some options there. Even the Giants, you've seen, Waller kind of be unsure about retiring, and they need another playmaker. Daniel Jones is not the deep vertical threat passer. Drew Lock is. We'll see if they're giving him an honest competition. But man, this is another tough one because you can see Harbaugh taking him at 5, doing a Harbaugh thing. And you could also see him going at pick 11 with a trade down by one of these teams. So I would stay away from it. But I will say he could, if top 15 pick is one of the odds, I will take that as opposed to trying to peg where he's going.
Yeah, I don't think it goes 6 to New York, but it is a little interesting because, Brian Daboll has come up as a tight ends coach. He went through New England with Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. They kind of centered their offense around the tight end position. So that would be fascinating. But again, I don't think that he would go at number 6 overall. I don't think that would require probably a trade down of some sort. But Proppy, how do you see Bowers in this over-under at 11.5?
I love Bowers as a prospect. I just have a hard time seeing him if he doesn't go to the Jets. I really think that's closer to his floor. I mean, I love the fit to the Chargers. I'm not ruling that out. I definitely get what Emery's saying regarding Harbaugh getting a tight end. It would make a lot of sense on paper, but I ultimately think 10 to the Jets is his ceiling, or the earliest he's most likely to go if we look at the potential range of outcomes. And if the Jets pass, I could see him potentially going in the mid to late teens with some I like. So if I'm looking at Bowers, I'm more looking to potentially attack him, and RJ knows this very well. From the long shot perspective, I could see if he ends up slipping past the Jets and he's available in that, 12 to 15 to 16 range, we could see some teams come a-calling, trading up for him. So one team I have my eye on is the Philadelphia Eagles. I think they're a viable long shot to draft Brock Bowers in that scenario where he falls. It would honestly be on brand with the Eagles. We've seen it with Brent Selleck when they drafted Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert when they had Zach Ertz under contract. They tend, before giving a guy a big contract, to draft his predecessor. So it would make a lot of sense to me. The Eagles are also very aggressive. I believe 3 of the last 4 rounds they've traded up in the first round. So in the scenario where he falls past the Jets, I definitely would look to keep an eye on the Eagles. And I love him. You're getting, I think, 50-1 odds on him going to Philly as well.
Love that. And in an underrated story as we kind of loom into this draft is Philadelphia's potential need at wide receiver. All the weird stuff going on with A.J. Brown. Obviously, they extended DeVonta Smith. Again, if they had to move on from A.J. Brown, Brock Bowers is a great weapon to pair with Jalen Hurts. So that would be, again, just a fascinating turn of developments, but not that surprising considering Howie Roseman and this Eagles front office, how much they trade and wheel and deal at the NFL draft. Quickly here, we'll go to the defensive side of the ball. We've talked about Dallas Turner a little bit. This has been taken off the board in some spots here, but his over-under at 9.5. RJ, quickly, minus 135 is the over, plus 105 is the under. How do you view him?
A major shift in the odds Monday related to Turner. Latu moved, like I said, to the favorite to go number 8 at some books or around the favorite. Last year, we saw Nolan Smith make a similar move for the Falcons around this time. Bijan ended up back as the favorite, was their pick. I think there's some fire to that smoke. Latu would be a beast for Morris. The question is whether Dallas Turner goes number 9 to Chicago. So my lean is to the over here. I don't think you'll find a good price at this point. And then if you look at Latu, I think you would take to the under. He's steamed toward the under. Teams are comfortable with his medicals. He's the top defender. I bet him plus 350 to be the first defender taken. I think that's a real option now that he's favored or close to go number 8. So you can still find juice on under 16.5 at him at minus 135 as of Monday morning. Would play that.
And we could combine both of them because the next one was Latu as well. So Dallas Turner, again, 9.5, his over-under. Latu, 17.5. The under for that is minus 188. So, Emery, how are you viewing both of these prospects? And again, is it better off just betting this person first defensive player off the board?
For Latu, absolutely. For Turner, your question is whether or not he's better than Jared Verse. And I think a lot of teams may have Verse ahead of Turner. So I will take the over, even though it's juiced at minus 135. I feel like Verse will catch some steam and make some ground, especially stacking back-to-back strong years at Florida State.
And then, Proppy, how do you view these two defensive players? The over, Turner 9.5, Latu 17.5.
I think Latu's a lock to go in the top 17 picks. Again, I'd look to attack it as the first defender. I also like his chances of going either 8 or 9 to Atlanta or Chicago. So, yeah, I like Latu quite a bit. I wouldn't look to lay the heavy juice, but I'd look to attack him elsewhere. As far as Dallas Turner is concerned, I think he is an overrated prospect. I think he's, he tests really well physically, athletically gifted, but just the production isn't there. I think Latu will be drafted ahead of him, and I think Turner ultimately falls out of the top 10.